Hi, and welcome to Shifters Podcast. Today, I have Audrey Camp here. She is an executive coach, an advisor, and expert on execution, and you worked a lot with OKRs.
Correct.
Yeah, so we have already done an episode earlier with the topic of OKRs. We talked about your background from Cognite, where you worked with the leadership team to execute on the vision. But what have you been doing since?
So in the couple years since we aired that episode, I've leaned into having my own consultancy and have worked with a great number of startups and scale-ups across Norway and Europe on a variety of different issues that they come to me with. And what I love about being a consultant is that they can come to me with their pain and I get to help them figure out what's the best thing to target that pain. So for me, where I get to spend most of my time is with leadership development. I do a lot of executive coaching, both for an individual executive and for a team. And then I also do leadership development programming, still OKRs and goal management, still performance management. And so when I find that there's a struggle, I come into it usually with a communication lens because that's my background. And one of the things that inspires me most is seeing when an organization that has a great idea and maybe has slowed down a little bit because they've been growing can find a way to overcome that hurdle by using good communication principles and figuring out how to target really clear, meaningful goals for their people.
What is the most common problem among the leaders you're working with?
So, to speak very frankly, with leaders who are in startups and scale-ups, what I find is often the people who are occupying chairs that have roles that have a C in the title, so the chiefs, that these folks are there in a bit of an untested way. And so they've been leading based on the fact that maybe they were one of the first in the room. They're the one with the highest level of competence in that area, and they were early. But that doesn't mean that they have been tested in that chair previously and really understand and wrap their arms around what that mandate looks like. And so as things grow, as bigger challenges come, organizations look to their leaders and have expectations for them that do not match with the level of experience that person has as a leader. It doesn't really matter at some point what your competence area is in your function if you don't also have leadership development sitting behind you.
Yeah, because you don't start a company because you want to lead.
Exactly. In fact, most of them don't want to be managers, right? Yeah. And then that's one of the fun things for me is that I'll come in and usually, again, people have the best intentions and they want to be good managers or good people leaders, but they haven't had the opportunity or enough challenges to really test themselves. So when I come in, there's usually something sitting between them and the next growth goal or the next sort of efficiency or productivity or execution goal. And I come in and try to diagnose with them what that is. And often it does come back to the leaders themselves have some muscles that are underdeveloped. So we figure out what those are and we target them together.
Yeah, because usually I think that people or founders think that I can do this. They have to find out the hard way. It's not like they're working like preventatively, right?
Exactly.
They don't, or am I wrong?
No, you're exactly right. And I think actually that's the best thing about founders, right? Is that they are the people who lean in and say, I think I can do this. It's the Pippi Longstocking thing.
Yeah.
Like we love a founder.
How hard can it be?
How hard can it be? And we want them to think that. And then we want them to ask for help when they need it.
Yeah.
And so that tends to be when I come into the picture.
So it's like, so it's the transition from founder to being a leader.
I think that that's exactly the way to think about that. And being a leader of other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else can you be a leader of?
Well, I was going to say leading a function or leading something else in terms of just
okay, so people
competence.
Skills. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have like a communication background, and communication is very central in leadership, isn't it? It's all about communicating.
And you and I spoke last time about how this is one of those main areas that when leaders, when anyone really, but we'll focus on leaders and founders, that when they look at themselves, they're like, what's an area of competence I want to build up? And communication is always sitting there because the bigger the organization gets, the more complexity there is, the harder you have to use those communication skills. And there are some fundamentals that, we just don't sit around and make sure that we've got on lock before we get to a state where they really are necessary.
Yeah.
But it's a growth area for almost everyone, including myself, right? We can be continuous learners in the area of communication.
I'm pretty good, though.
No. Yeah, you're fine, Lucas.
No, I have much to learn.
Gold stars.
Yeah. So, okay. So we are doing now a mini-series, 4 episodes on execution. And the first one today, we're going to speak about goals. And then we're going to talk about focus. And then we're going to talk about accountability. And in the end, we're going to talk about rhythms and tooling and execution. Like putting all together, what kind of rituals do you have. But these are also interlinked with OKRs, right?
Yes.
The OKR system. So the OKRs is just one of many methods, right, to execute.
Absolutely. I mean, managing goals and making sure that you can execute, that's agnostic,
Yeah.
right? But OKRs is the one that I have used most frequently, I've introduced most frequently to smaller organizations.
But these principles I just mentioned are universal, right?
Absolutely.
No matter the method.
You can pick your method,
Yeah.
but these focus the areas for our miniseries are absolutely across methodology.
So I just before you arrived here, I interviewed a founder in Firi, Tuk, and he said that he needed advisors around him who could tell him no to stuff because he, like me, has a monkey brain and he has a lot of new ideas all the time. And what he has learned when he turned around the company was the power of focus. We're not going to talk about focus that much today, but we're going to talk about goals. And everyone has goals, but but on the other hand, it seems like not everyone has goals. So, what is a goal, and how important is a goal?
So, what is a goal? So, a goal is, for me, it's saying, here's where I would like to be, or here's something I would like to have, here's something I would like to be able to do that I can't yet. So, it's just moving from X to Y. You identify who you are today and who you're not, and who you need to be tomorrow and what that includes. And you try to move yourself from X to Y by having the goal first. And when you define it that way, it allows everybody else around you to say, right, that's the same definition. Here's who we are and what we have. There's where we need to be and what we don't have yet, but we need to have. And that simple breakdown of like, that's what the goal is. It's as you say, not everyone has them. It's more just like, I think that everybody has a goal in mind. Like things can be sitting in your brain, but that doesn't mean that everybody else sees the world the same way that you do and will define it the same way. So this is the first communication challenge: is how do you get out of your own head and translate what you've got in your own head to the people who are sitting around the table with you.
Okay, so then the key word here is shared, maybe. Shared goal. What is our
Share
shared
those
goal?
goals. And that's for the sake of execution, the larger you get, the more important it is to prioritize that sharing and make sure that it's an effective sharing. For example, not sharing a goal that's going to change a lot over the next 3 or 4 weeks because then everybody's trying to catch up with you. They're not sure where to run. Putting something that's too far in the future and people can't understand what they can do today to make that happen.
Yeah.
So thinking in terms of, from a leadership standpoint, I need to share, but which version of this do I share? How can I make this effective for the group that's sitting around the table and I need to do something with me?
So with all your knowledge, what does a good goal look like?
So I worked with a company here in Oslo called Saga Robotics, and one of my favorite goals that they had actually defined the number of hectares of strawberry fields that they wanted to have their robots that are servicing and targeting powdery mildew, if you want to get technical. How many hectares that they were going to cover with their robots. So it actually was a physical acreage that they wanted to cover. And that gave them a very quantifiable number. They could say, here's how much we cover today. Here's how much we want to cover by the end of the year, for example. And then what's it going to take? How many robots physically? What does our platform need to be able to do? How many people do we need to be servicing? How many customers do we need to have? And it starts to break down very significantly and clearly if you have that initial super meaningful and very visible, tangible goal. So working with them, that was a great goal.
So is that how you do it? You set the goal and then you look at what you have, or do you look at what you have and then set the goal accordingly?
It depends on whether you have key performance indicators already within your organization. So I come into organizations sometimes where they have KPIs and they've been using KPIs and saying we have targets. So they're like, here's what the KPI is today on, SaaS or annual recurring revenue, that sort of thing. If you have those, you're pretty mature on them. You can say, I want to move that from X to Y. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's meaningful for your organization. So it's not enough, but it's a nice thing to have. If you don't have key performance indicators in place already, it's tough because then you have to come up with that the first time and say, this is the thing that matters to us.
But I mean like your resources, because to reach certain goals, you need certain resources, right?
Oh, yeah. So making sure that it's realistic is very important.
Yeah. So you're not talking about like the SMART goals. Is that what you have in mind?
So, I mean, I definitely think about SMART goals as one of the ways that I define a good goal.
Yeah.
And when you use the R, the realistic part of the SMART goal, that is looking at like, do we have the resources necessary to achieve that?
Yeah.
That's one of the ways that you evaluate the goal.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because in terms of realism, so all CEOs wants to have the greatest goals,
Of
right?
course.
Of course, and the ones who are actually implementing and executing on it wants to have less goals that are achievable, in a sense. So where do you draw the line? Where how ambitious should you be?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, I mean, I think it depends on the type of goal that it is and also how mature your organization is when it comes to these goals. Because the first time that you're sitting down to set a goal and you say to yourself, well, we need to get from X to Y on number of customers signed or something like that. You need to make sure that you don't put something on the table that everyone in that room is going to sit there and go, but that's impossible. And at the same time, it's all of the data shows that if you put a goal on the table that's too in the near term and achievable to the group, they'll actually barely achieve it. So you need to find a way to stretch them forward, which is one reason why the OKR structure works so well if you pay attention to that, because it asks you to extend about 30% past what you think you're going to be able to do. And it says, make this so that it's not something that you're going to be able to get to easily. It's not impossible, but it's really going to take something extra, either in terms of, personal output or collaboration that hasn't been there before or new resources being hired, something. Nothing that is impossible, but you want it to feel just out of reach. And there's something very human about that. We like to reach for something that is just out of reach.
Yeah, not everyone.
I mean, you would say that, but the data shows that actually people prefer to have a goal that, and I will say, maybe they personally wouldn't say, I would love to have that. People are more likely to work harder and more effectively if it's slightly out of reach.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it seems like the, grown-ups that are tricking their children, in a sense.
I've never done that. Have you done that? I bribe my child all the time. Go ahead.
No, so in terms of like the stretchy, like okay, let's lure them into
Dangling
working
or
harder,
something.
and give them something extra to work for. And then, like from a pessimistic, skeptical human view of people, I would say that, but people just they really don't want to work that hard. They want to work just enough. They have their own personal goals that they want to achieve, not the company goals. So how do you create that enthusiasm, and how do you create that, why is a stretchy goal cool to achieve?
Yeah.
How do you create that narrative around that?
The stretchiness is not the valuable part for most people. In fact, if you try to make someone stretch for something and you haven't appropriately checked in with what they find meaningful before you set that goal, you could swing and miss. So it's not that the stretchiness component itself is that valuable. It's actually more, and this is the leadership dilemma or the leadership challenge. How do I make the thing that means the most to my business matter and have meaning to the people who are the only ones who can put their hands on the keyboards, for example, and achieve it?
That's a great question. How respond to that?
How do we do that?
How do you
right?
do that? Yeah.
So this is, I was at, oh gosh, I'm going to forget his name. And I wish that we could like drop it in here. Patrick at Strise. Patrick, what's his last? Schenning?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe, yes.
You know him.
Yeah.
CTO at Strise. He was at an event I was at recently.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that the role of CTO is very much the role of Chief Translation Officer. And this is about taking management's needs and translating them to engineering, and taking engineering's needs and translating them to management. And I couldn't have said that better myself. I was blown away. And this is really what it is. As a senior leader, as an executive, looking at what you need to get done for your business and saying, so how can I put this into terms that the people who have their hands on the keyboards or running out with our customers will understand and care about? And this is about understanding your audience and knowing what motivates them. And which is why this leadership development component is so important. Setting up great goals isn't enough. We could outsource that. We could have AI or something create a set of goals for us. But unless we check in with the people who are going to be achieving those goals and ask them, what is it that's motivating to you? What do you think is impossible for us to do? What's the one thing that would, delight you or excite you or make you super motivated to go farther? If we don't have those conversations, and those are the conversations I encourage my leaders to have, then writing down the goals top down doesn't work. They have to come up with them themselves.
So why isn't the M in SMART goals stand for motivation?
But it does stand for meaningful.
Oh,
So, so for me, that's
Okay.
both.
Yeah.
There's a new book out that's coming out right now that's something about mattering, and I think this is where I spend a lot of my time right now. Is how do we make sure that human beings know why their work matters?
Yeah.
And the more that leaders take it to heart that if they give each person a sense of mattering, that they will have somebody who's a partner in the enterprise as opposed to somebody who they're directing to do stuff, the better it is for them and for the company. And I think leaders come to that too late a lot of the times in these situations because as founders, we're usually originally around the table with a bunch of people who really own the key idea first.
Exactly.
So we didn't have to motivate anybody for the first couple of years or something because we were all in a room working around the clock. We all had the same sense of ownership, sometimes literally, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, wait, now there are people here who don't own the company the way that I did, who didn't have the big idea and are just adopting it. How do I translate that motivation to them? And the trick there is that what motivates you doesn't necessarily motivate them.
Would you say that the M is the most important letter in the SMART goal?
Oh gosh, that is such a good idea. Okay.
If it lacks, it wouldn't make sense, right?
It wouldn't. I mean, you can try it. It would not be smart.
No, it was SART.
SART. Yeah, and I think because I also think that like the time boundness of OKRs is really crucial to having excellent execution. So making sure that you have a very standardized approach is actually very important, I would say, in terms of having effective goals. But no, the meaningfulness, if you want to motivate people outside of the initial table at a startup or a scale up, that is absolutely key.
Because it's not the same. So you can have, let's say, you can have a SART goal.
For sure.
I think more companies have SART goals than SMART goals.
I would subscribe to that. Yes.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
So the M is really important.
I think so.
And then that's why I think communication is important too, because you really need to communicate this with your company and your people, and you need to like you said, you understand. You need to have empathy, and you need to put yourself in their shoes and find out what do they really care about.
And that's the trick, because communication, going back to the fundamentals, is not about what you have to say. It's about what they need to hear. It's about what lands with them.
Yeah.
And so if we don't do that critical piece of understanding, who am I actually talking to? How will they best receive this information? What do I need to understand from them to see if they understood it? Do that critical feedback loop. If we don't do that, then yeah, you're giving them SART goals. You're making them march. And I think that that's where the OKR process, which is what I tend to reach for, allows for that shared sense of ownership, because in the process of developing those goals, you identify meaning.
Yeah.
And you have that the people who are actually going to achieve the goals develop them from the ground up.
Yeah.
And there are places where you do quality checking across in order to make sure that they all still line up. That's still very important. But you get a sense of who your people are, what motivates them, how they would word something so that they feel compelled by it.
Yeah, because I mean, if it's no, when I think about this, I think that the M is so super important, and you have to start with M. And it's like Simon Sinek says, start with why. So how do you said there's a process. How do you land on the M? How do you find that M?
I'm realizing as we're talking that I'm misremembering the M. The M is measurable.
Oh,
it's not meaningful.
So
it should be meaningful.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we need like SMART goals with an extra M.
Yeah.
But I think that this is maybe where I've taken us off on a little turn here, because the meaningfulness is so important, and this is what I've found.
So why isn't it meaningful?
What is it? How is it not in the SMART goals?
Exactly.
Is what I'm saying. And the measurability piece is extremely important. But if it doesn't matter to the people, and if they don't pick what they're measuring, for example. I've seen this happen where in organizations, a company will have a CEO come in and they'll point to an annual recurring revenue number and say, this is our target. Everybody get in line, right?
Yep.
And the organization goes, okay, well, we understand why that's important because we're smart people, but that doesn't mean that I feel like I can do something today that impacts that. So what's my goal supposed to be?
Yep.
And if you don't have something that sits nearer to them and is measured in a way that matters to them, you're in trouble. And what sales measures is different from what engineering measures. That said, to build empathy between those groups, making sure that you sit down and say, do you understand why this group is compelled by the goal that they're setting? That's another place where OKRs can come into play, because you share your goals and you give some feedback and you develop that empathy.
So what would be the process to land this goal? You said that the process would identify make it easy to create these goals.
So leaders, for example, in an organization say, here's our strategy, which is, of course, longer term. Here's the thing we need to win in the shorter term. This is going to be our top priority for whatever the cadence is. We'll say, for example, half a year. And then they say, so this area is what we need to win, and here's what that looks like from X to Y for the whole organization. And then they lean in to the different divisions, to the different departments, to the different teams based on how big they are. And they say, where do you see yourselves directly reflected in this? And they just ask, where do you see yourselves indirectly reflected? How do you support this? And where do you not see yourselves at all? That set of questions, which is what I always use for my teams, you find really quick whether people understand how they connect to the work.
Yeah.
And I find leaders will find all the time they've made assumptions about what their teams understand in terms of what they do that's directly helpful or what they do that's indirectly helpful. I've seen teams where a leader goes in and goes, my team knows this, I don't need to ask. They'll ask the question and the team will say, I'm not connected to this goal at all. And the leader's sitting there going, are you kidding? Like, we keep this code base, we do this kind of support, we, building this other tool. That's what matters here. And the team goes, oh, we didn't even see it that way. So ask those questions so that you understand what the team sees first. Then if there's like an education gap and you need to illuminate some stuff, communicate with them, share that with them. Here's what I see. Then have that feedback loop of, so now, based on that, what goal do you see for us? How can we best deliver in this short-term period?
Now I'm reflecting on the fly here as well. Thinking about is the meaningfulness whatever the employee thinks that he or she can deliver value. It's like that. Okay, I can deliver value in this way, and the meaningfulness comes from the ability to create value. If I can create value towards what the company goal, I will be happy. It creates meaning for me to do this.
I think that's very much part of it. I also think that we should never make the assumption that the employee themselves understands what's meaningful to them.
No.
Especially for employees who have never worked anywhere else, this is a new exercise, right?
Yeah.
So we see people all the time who don't have that in their background. So then we say, okay, then there's also that opportunity to help them to identify value for the first time, and possibly in a creative way. Sometimes, we'll find as well, OKRs don't actually cover everything that the company's doing. It's supposed to be an area that's specific for a time-bound period. So there will be employees who don't have a direct impact or even an indirect impact on that priority area for that term. Should they also have an OKR of their own somewhere that is compelling to them? I think so.
Yeah.
But it's that practice of going, okay, so you're really not reflected in this thing that's important to the company. How do you still add value to us? What do you do that's meaningful for us? And it gives the employee a chance to assert that meaning and have that sense of mattering so that they can stay on the ride. Because around the corner might be another area that you do need them to focus on and they'll see a direct impact. But for this, period, they're not directly connected to it.
So the process is that the leadership will define the boundaries of the problems that we are going to solve in a sense. So let's say I'm a leadership group. I say, okay, these are the 3 areas we need to focus on the next quarter.
Yeah.
And then you go down down to the employees or the divisions and ask them and tell them, okay, how do you see yourself contributing to us reaching these goals? And then, but do you have anything quantified then? Do you have when the leadership have defined the areas?
Yeah.
Are there any quantification or are there just areas?
So it depends a little bit. So one thing that I like to advise, and again, it depends on the maturity of the organization, but if it's like the first time and we're adopting OKRs, often what I'll say is don't have your hard and fast goal when you go talk to your teams. Have the area, have information about where you are today and roughly where you want to be, but you don't need to have it completely nailed down, partially because you want your team to own that and to drive it upward. They might say to you, oh, we can go even farther than that. So don't give them a limit so that they don't have to dream, right? Yeah. So I think that's where I go with kind of a half-formed approach from the leadership team. Even if they might in their heads know, we can make that pretty solid pretty quick. Go with a draft and allow people to have input on it, especially in a smaller startup and scale-up place that tends to be healthier for the organization.
Yeah, allow them to be ambitious.
Absolutely. I mean, why would we limit our people?
Exactly. Don't be negative like me. Be positive.
Don't be skeptical. No. We are yin and yang in that, I think, Lucas.
Yeah, I think so. They give that. Then you have a basis to create a specific goal. So the S if I remember.
That's specific.
Yeah. So specific, measurable, realistic, achievable, and...
You're going to edit this, right? Here we go. You ready? I'll do it. It's
Okay.
specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Time-bound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And time-bound, yeah. All of these are really important.
All of them are very important.
Okay, so in an OKR setting, you have like the blueprint is every quarter.
So the standard blueprint is that you do this every quarter, and it depends on how much process overhead you have, whether or not I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I like to keep my process pretty light, in one sense, but I also like to make sure that everybody has a chance to have some input on it. So I tend with my clients to go for a half-year model with a quarterly check-in. So you only have 2 times a year when you
have time to actually reach the goal.
Exactly. You have time to reach the goals, and you also have a quarterly check-in where you have a chance to adjust the goals if things haven't gone to plan, but you don't necessarily do like a full deep dive, W-shaped feedback loop in order to get everybody setting new goals every quarter.
Yeah. How would you describe the power of goals? How have you experienced the power of goals in where you've worked before?
So there have been a couple of things. One is just the sense when alignment is real. And I think that I meet more small companies and leaders who struggle with alignment than I do those who actually have it. And when alignment is real and everybody understands the most important thing and it works as a true priority setter, that's the most powerful thing. We live in really noisy times and there's always something else to be done and there's a lot of fires to fight. But if you have OKRs or another goal methodology that actually has you aligned to what's most important for the short term, it allows your people to, without having to do lots of unnecessary feedback loops, make choices and be autonomous and have authority over their choices in different parts of your organization much faster. So if they can actually use the OKRs to say, I have 2 things I could do right now. I know I need to do X and not Y because our OKRs tell me so. This is the most important thing. That's when leaders start to feel the benefit because they go, oh, nobody's asking me if they can go do their job. They're just doing their job. And I'm trusting that they're doing the right thing because we agree on what the priority is. So that's super powerful. And when I see that happening, people are so grateful that it's happening. Another way is actually in terms of just communication and understanding across the company. So building empathy. So when OKRs or another goal methodology exists that is standardized and you've gone through your process, having the opportunity within an organization that's gotten kind of large and they don't necessarily check in with each other all the time to say, oh, I need to speak to you about this thing that we're doing because within our OKRs, I think what you're doing might be working against what I'm doing. And having a framework through which you can have a difficult conversation with somebody, challenging, to say, like, let's talk about this the same way when commercial speaks one way and engineering speaks another way. It's like being able to bring those teams together and saying, let's speak this way through the framework that we've agreed on in OKRs. Amazing things happen because then it's not one versus the other. It's in the cooperative project of having your OKRs actually line up. So I've seen empathy building. I've seen the meaningfulness translate, as I said, across the organization and having the opportunity for those things. And I think that the other, of course, most powerful thing is when the outcomes actually start to be realized. And one thing when I was at Cognite, I was the one who, back in the day, nowadays they have software for all of this, but at the time we had our own spreadsheets for tracking our OKRs, and I was in charge of those. And we had it so that you could see every month, there was a check-in where you could see who was progressing on their OKRs, not in terms of from 0 to 1, but rather in terms of likelihood of delivery, because you have the whole half year to do it. How likely is it that you will deliver on what you said you would deliver?
Yeah.
And so we would have this heat map of how well are things running. And it gave our executive management team at the time such a great way to zoom in and say,
with individual names?
Owners, yeah.
Owners.
So every goal and every key result had an owner next to it. And so if you looked at the heat map in terms of by department, for example, you could say, wow, this part of R&D is struggling.
Yeah.
What's going on over there? And you could drop right in and say, please tell us more about why this isn't moving. And they would say, because you've thrown a new priority at us, because this client is struggling, whatever it is.
So that will be the conversation, not the blame game.
There's no blame. It's more like, hey, let's lean in here and figure out, so what is going wrong, because I know you're trying.
Okay. One important principle that we just touched on now is ownership.
Oh, yeah.
A goal needs an owner.
Absolutely.
like a name, a
And
person.
one person.
Yeah.
And this is one thing that I will say.
One person, one goal.
One person per goal. And I will say, people can have more than one, but I would say the ownership piece, it has to be connected to their level, how many goals they own. It's not appropriate for a very lower level employer like a junior employee to own tons of goals. But somebody who's sitting with a higher level of competence and a higher level of responsibility, absolutely more. So making sure that lines up. But this ownership thing, I can tell a story from the Cognite days because it took us multiple cycles to realize how important it was to have a single name. We started by saying, we'll just have the head of the divisions own everything underneath them. But that doesn't give us the visibility we need. And very quickly it can turn into, well, I think it's this person. And that person's going, I don't know, nobody told me. So from the beginning, when we're developing the goals, making sure that somebody is like raising their hand to be there. And you also learn a lot as a leader when people don't raise their hands. That means that they don't feel like they're enabled to do it. And I that's where that tension is, particularly in scale-ups where you're like, why aren't my people just running toward their stuff? And it's like, well, because they don't necessarily feel enabled to do that. They know they're going to run into problems with this guy over here, or they won't have enough resources or whatever it is. And that's not always a good excuse, but they'll use it if their name's not attached to it. So we learned that slowly at Cognite. Yep. And now it's a principle when I go into new organization or new clients. I always say, we start with an owner. And we talk about ownership. We do a meta conversation about ownership beforehand. What does it mean to own this? Because it's not actually that they are like their heads on the line for whether or not it succeeds. What the question is that you are responsible for the rhythm of business around this OKR. You're going to tell it, you're going to be the one who checks things in and the person who tells us what's going right and what's going wrong. And if you need help, you're the person who we expect to raise your hand. And that's what that ownership looks like. So we have that conversation early and then people raise their hands. And if they don't raise their hands, they're nominated. But then the leadership team knows not enough people wanted to raise their hands around this. We
just
probably have another
them.
thing. I never recommend that.
Okay, so every goal needs an owner.
Every goal needs an owner named.
Yeah. Okay. What else is important with a goal? Is a goal? So let's say we have a goal, and then we find out maybe this is the wrong goal.
Oh yeah, happens all the time.
It does happen. Yeah. What do we do? Do we stay on course and then just try a little bit harder to achieve the goal, or do we do something else?
So these are those leadership challenges that in absence of a goal management methodology and structure, the leader actually ends up struggling with much longer, in my experience, than if they have the structure. So within the structure, you have touch points where you're asked, hey, look at that goal. Is this still the right one for us? If it's not, what else might be? What did we learn, et cetera? Within an OKR framework, for example, you have the opportunity to say, we are advancing, the right way on this, for example, but we've actually learned something new since we set the goal. So that needs to change because it's foolhardy to continue running down this path when some new context has come into the picture. And with startups in particular, we're constantly moving. Stuff changes so fast. We have to be willing to adjust the goal. But my rule is you never get to adjust the goal without telling the story. And that doesn't mean like sugarcoating it. It means like what did we do wrong in the beginning? What didn't we know before? What do we know now? And making sure that it is a communication opportunity for the leader with their team. So I'm a big fan of being able to adjust goals, but you have to talk about it. And the OKR process is just one that sets you up to have those touch points predictably so that you can do that.
But can you do it after 1 week? If it like, so do you have to wait for the check-in?
You don't have to. There's no, but at the same time, if it's only taken a week to throw you off, then maybe you didn't quite go through that goal process the right way the first time.
Okay, yeah.
So that because the relevance question, like the quality checks on drafting that goal, should make it so that you don't actually have that come up. And I rarely have seen anything happen that quickly. I have seen times when a strategic choice happens because, especially in startups, people are very opportunistic, right? So a leader's like, I'm going to add formal structure to our goal management, and then everybody will be aligned. And then that same leader turns around and handshake. There's a new deal, new client, and they're very demanding, and this affects our product strategy like this. And then you have to go in and like adjust all these goals. And I'm thinking to myself, well, then maybe that full goal methodology wasn't what you needed at the time.
Yeah.
But the point is that for the leader, it's like, what are we optimizing for? If you're at the place where you know that you need to move effectively down the field and get from X to Y for the sake of well, obviously success overall, but your board is watching and your employees need to feel like they're actually making strides. Then that's when you want to make sure that you have something in place to be able to develop these things, align people, move down the road. If you are still in the place where opportunism is going to discount everything, then maybe you shouldn't be locking down structure this soon.
But if people are like the owner of the goals are, never reaching their goals, what should you do then?
Yeah.
Is it the goal or is it the people?
So the first thing that you look at is, were we stretching really? Right? So if you're coming, everybody's coming up. And again, like green is 70%. I work with a lot of orgs that don't like to do that. So they'll say it has to be 80 and then we'll call it green. But the traditional way is 70.
So if you reach 70%, you have to have a stretchy goal. But if you reach 70%, that's green. That's good.
That's good.
If you reach 90%, then it was too easy.
Right. And if you think of it in terms of a heat map, with all the goals on the board, and the ones that are 70% or above are green, and the ones between, we'll say, like 30 and 69 are yellow, and then anything else is red. What you don't want, obviously, is all red, but you also don't want all green. If you have all green, then you didn't get as far as you could have gotten.
Oh.
And that's the tricky part. So then trying to find a way where you're like, I'm going to have kind of a sprinkling and a smattering of reds, and I'm going to have a bunch of greens, I'm going to have a bunch of yellow, right? And the yellow is okay.
You want like the pride flag.
I would love a pride flag. That's what I'm looking for. And I think that this is where, if you're looking at it, you see it that way and you're like, how do I look at success? And when I'm working with my teams as I enter to introduce OKRs, I say, don't expect this to be greens across the board. Expect a rainbow.
Yeah.
However, be excited about what you get to learn about that rainbow, because the yellows don't tell the full story. You've got to get in there and figure out, so what would have helped you to get to green? What didn't enable you? What could I have done better as a leader?
Yeah.
And there will always be people who are sort of like pointing fingers. Most people actually are, as long as you have a psychologically safe space, are very quick to say, okay, next time it's like this. I'll be able to do it if, X fill in the blank.
Okay, we have to round this off because we have much more to talk about. Or do you have any?
No.
I forgot my question about. That was a good question.
I threw you off
yes,
by having a physical reaction.
Where were we? The goals.
Rainbow.
I'm trying to. It was actually not a very bad question.
No, I want to hear it. Is it the one? Okay, we were saying that if nobody's achieving the goals, what do we do? That was the thing we talked about. Was it a follow up to that?
No.
Okay.
But anyway, yes, I have it back. Now it's gone. No. It sounds like a lot of work to manage this.
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth it? Obviously, if I ask you, you say yes, of course. but like for a smaller company, or as call it a division in a company, is it worth it? There's a lot of you have to be on, because I believe that most people that are trying to implement OKRs will fail doing so.
Yeah. I've seen it fail many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why does it fail, and is it worth it?
So it fails for a number of reasons. I'll spoiler alert and say it's worth it. But it's worth it. I want to caveat that by saying, not if you try to adopt something that's more strict or more structured than you need. So for when it comes to execution, structure and culture need to kind of match up. If your company's not prepared for a great deal of structure, then you put this like big, heavy apparatus on something that's just growing. It crushes it. So you need to make sure that you're not putting more process than necessary onto your organization. At the same time, I've seen OKRs be adapted in ways that are quite light and can actually maximize the things that you do have, and are sort of tailored to the experiences and the things that people are looking forward to within your current culture. So in that case, if you can adopt it like that, it is totally worth it, because then you can, as leaders, level up your own leadership while providing enough structure for people to have some predictability, to be able to see some progress, to have that alignment. It's all very powerful.
How much time? Like, how much time do I have? So if I'm a CEO or a division leader or whatever, how much time do I need to use to do this? Like minimum.
I'm like not prepared to answer that question. Hold on. Let me think. And you can edit the pause.
No.
But I think, okay.
5 hours a week?
5 hours a week?
I don't know.
That's way too much.
Okay, less than that.
Let's go back.
Okay.
So I mean, so on average, because what it is that the cycle itself requires management to spend a lot of time at the tops of each of the cycles.
Yeah.
And to do intensive feedback looping with their organizations. But once that's up, then what's required is very minimal in terms of check-in. So you can have very light weeks where it's just checking in and saying, what is the status of these things? And is there any place that I need to spend more time or I need to delegate that another leader spends more time? So it should only be really intensive at the top of each cycle and then slightly intensive at the end of each cycle because of the valuable retrospective part, which you and I'm sure we'll talk about in a future episode, but the learning opportunities that are there.
Okay, so how much time? Okay, so the check-ins are easy, but how much time do I use before an OKR cycle and the at the end?
So I mean,
1 day.
Yeah, so I would say like
a
day with the leadership team to get stuff together, and then you're going to be spending probably another 4 hours at some point in the top of the cycle to make sure that you are actually taking everything back in from around the organization and synthesizing it to set the goals and make sure that everything's aligned. And you need to have somebody whose job it is to run this within the organization, not necessarily as their full-time job, but their responsibility to. I call it cranking the wheel of OKRs.
It can't be the CEO.
Can the CEO do it?
Yeah.
I've seen the CEOs do it, especially in smaller organizations.
But should you have someone else?
I would suggest for the admin part of it that you have another person who actually pays attention to that.
Who loves admin.
Who loves the idea of using the tools correctly to make sure that you're super efficient and then provide the transparency for the organization.
Are you admin person?
I've been that, yes.
Yeah, but what do you like best? I'm not an admin person.
Well, I don't like admin for the sake of admin, but one of the things that I absolutely love, I mean, there are people, there are total, but these people work in accounting or they work in insurance, and that's where I used to work, and I left. But there's something about the visibility of having your whole organization working behind a single set of things and you being able as a leader to see it, that does draw you into these platforms when you use them. So then you might find CEOs and other C-levels who become admin-y type people because they want to be in there. But no, I would say that you have somebody whose responsibility, chief of staff, people team, communications person, somebody who can take that and make sure that their responsibility is to make sure that all of the tools are running efficiently. But beyond that, it's really strategy work and execution work that you should be doing already, repurposed for the setting of specific goals.
Yeah. Okay, so Audrey, we are doing a course on this. And but we are doing 4 podcast episodes,
right?
And by listening to those, you should be able to implement it by yourself, right?
We're going to give it our very best shot.
Yeah, more or less. But we will also do a course.
Yes.
And how did we think about doing this course? How does it look like? Because it's not like a normal course, is it?
No, it's a very exciting course. It's a course wherein, the way you and I talked about it, the idea here is to help leaders build the right muscles to be able to become experts at execution. And we want to have it such that you're bringing in both leadership development opportunities, communication development opportunities, but that by the end, you have a kit that will allow you to build and run specifically an OKR cycle for your organization. And provide some of the things that we find are necessary to support organizations that have failed with OKRs previously, looking at areas of weakness around, for example, accountability and keeping to the rhythm and using the communication wisely. So we're looking at those and trying to proactively support in those specific areas so that if you do run OKRs in your organization, this course stands alongside you and provides you with the things you need so that you stay on track.
So to translate that, it's we have 4 check-ins during 1 year, and so we can actually be there for the teams that are implementing this. Because I think that's what the biggest problem with the OKRs is, not to understand the OKR. It's not like reading the book. It makes
anyone
so much
can do
sense.
that. Yes,
it's by John Doerr, Measure What Matters. That's super easy and it's very easy to understand. It's so super easy, and that's the great thing about. But the hard thing about OKRs is the implementing part. It's the execution part of the execution.
Yes.
Right. So we will be there during the year
with you. That's the idea.
Yeah, but don't you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a brilliant idea, and I think that because there's the book, and there are 1,000 software tools out there to capture OKRs. But it's still up to the leaders to develop the right ones and to keep them on track and to use them to really align and get the most out of their organization. So we're developing a course to stand alongside you so you can run that and do it really, really well.
That's really cool. Okay, so this was the first episode about goals, and the next episode we will talk about focus, and see you then.
Bye-bye.